Okay everybody, welcome back. News Without Borders, Inequality Part 2. So in the last part we talked about the causes of inequality, about the more of a background on inequality. So feel free to go back and have a look at that if you would like a bit of background. But this time we're going to talk more about the state of affairs. We're going to talk a little bit about global equality, a little bit about the measurements, and also about what we can do to solve inequality in the world. Right? That's the utopian vision.
I think it's important to remember that inequality is not just within the UK, or I think we mentioned the US before as well. It's actually a global trend in many ways. The international nature, the neoliberalisation, if you like, movement from mixed markets to free markets. It's supported by the EU, the IMF. It's kind of inevitable that all of these countries are sort of following this same pattern, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if we look, right, of course every country is not following it exactly, right? So we're seeing these are trends, but there are some people who kind of buck that trend as well. So if you look at the comparisons between different countries and what kind of their levels of inequality are, you actually see some pretty interesting stuff, right? So two economists, Wilkinson and Pickett, actually did this, and you may have seen their TED talk, wrote a book as well called The Spirit Level. So I just first want to show you one graph, right, and that's going to be the health and social problems on the y-axis. So what is that? That's all like life expectancy, literacy, infant mortality, mental illness, and all these kind of various social issues that affect people. And then on the x-axis, you've got gross national income per capita, right? So this measure of growth, and you can see that there's just no relationship, right? It's hard to see anything that's going on there. But if we change from GNI to income inequality, then suddenly you see this very clear line, right? Look how close all those dots are to the trend line. You can see the more income inequality there is in a society, then the more incidences they have of all these different various social problems which we're constantly debating about in society, about how we can improve it and lamenting all these different issues. You can see the USA there, okay, the richest country in the world by a long way, but look also at how much more social problems it has than all of these other countries, right? So this is, I think this is making big waves in social psychology and in political psychology and just economics in general, because I think it makes an extremely strong case for reducing inequality as a means of dealing with social problems, right? So why design all of these myriad of expensive ways to try and deal with teenage pregnancy, to try and deal with prisons and so forth, when actually maybe you can get all these benefits just by reducing inequality in a country, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, seems a lot of evidence for that. It's also worth noting as well, I think, that we touched on it very briefly in the last video, that we're not talking about communism here, right? We're not advocating a Stalinist-esque state controls everything is centrally planned. That's not the idea behind it. I mean, there's a whole spectrum in between. As soon as you mention taxation, as you mentioned before, as soon as you mention taxation, people go, oh, no, you're not taking my money, scroungers. All of these hot words come up in people's minds. But there is this massive spectrum in between where you can have taxation at very low levels for most citizens and a very progressive social welfare system, and still have a very a thriving capitalist quasi-free market.
All the countries that we're looking at here on this graph, it's not like, oh look, equality at the bottom is the USSR and at the top. No, the bottom ones here are Japan and Sweden, right? And I think it's worth mentioning Japan and Sweden because they've got two very different ways of achieving less inequality, right? One has very high taxes and redistribution, and the other has just a low ratio of income between the top earners and the bottom earners, right? Mm-hmm. And that ratio is something like 1 to 3.5, the lowest, the bottom 20% to the top 20%. In Japan, UK, that's more like seven times more. But there's two different ways, so it doesn't need to be taxes. But I still think some people here are kind of probably going to be thinking, we don't want to be reducing incentives for people to work hard, but I think we also covered that a little bit in the first video.
So that's kind of what we're hoping to do with this video actually, is to try and tell people that it's not one extreme or the other. It's not about the state controlling everything or the state controlling nothing. There's a whole spectrum between, with a variety of policies that we're going to be talking about and hopefully expand the debate at least a little bit.
Right, so why don't I go and get started with number one, right? So we talked about the ways in which competition laws aren't enforced and people can get monopolies and various different ways as well before. So corporate governance, antitrust laws. So I think one obvious way, unfortunately, which Theresa May has just rejected, is to put workers on boards, right? So if you've got workers on boards, then they might be able to have some kind of say in curbing that crazy rocket launcher of CEO pay that's been going up something like 78 times more since 1978 than worker pay, right? So that seems one obvious way. Transparency in financial markets, instead of just these black holes where nobody knows what's going on in finance. And as well, I think a hugely important one is taking white-collar crime seriously and corruption in the financial sector, right? So could you remind me how many people were jailed after the financial crisis?
None.
Was it really?
None, right? Did you say one?
None.
That one guy, remember the one guy? Yeah,
God,
exactly.
you'd feel sorry for him, wouldn't you? You talk about picking on someone.
You can see him on Monopoly, you know, he's on that corner square.
And I think if you compare it with the riots, it's such an excellent example of a two-tiered justice system, where if you run in and grab a pack of balloons, which some ridiculous things people were jailed for in the riots, you know, then you get these jail sentences. But people involved in you know, creating this massive financial crisis that sucked trillions out of the economy, not one person jailed, right? So we've got to take this white-collar crime seriously, and I think especially in the financial sector.
Yeah, so finance as well. I mean, you really have to look at what the finance sector, what banks should do. Why were they created? They were created to take the savings of a country and distribute it, to invest it in businesses around the country, or to invest it in productivity, increasing productivity. But as the financial sector has grown and regulation has shrunk, that's not what has been happening. In essence, the finance sector, they engage in rent seeking, which is basically you're not creating wealth. They're just taking wealth from one place and moving it to another place. There's nothing being created. There's no economic expansion happening as a result of the financial sector.
There's no benefit to the country other than just redistributing income upwards.
And it does tend to be, it's the rich that benefit from this, naturally, because if you think about the bank, they take the savings, the majority of savings within a deposit safe of a bank, the abstract deposit, which is now just computerized numbers, that's mostly rich people's money. So when you're getting a mortgage as a working class person, when you're getting a bank loan in order to fund whatever it may be, starting a new business, that's going to come from rich people's pockets, and they're going to take some money for the top of that. That's rent seeking. You're not creating anything, you're just making a profit off...
trying to manipulate markets in a way that's going to benefit your particular sector or organisation.
Right. And it's really erratic as well. Like if you look at, we haven't left the EU yet, and yet all of these financial problems that the Guardian bang on about every day, this is a result of speculation, financial speculation. Nothing has changed except people's minds, except the way that people think about the UK economy. This is pure speculation, and it's a very dangerous thing to have to have such a dominant sector controlled by people's whims.
And I think related to that, like you mentioned how nothing much has changed in the financial sector, right? So we're talking, let's remember, about ways to kind of reduce inequality. Now, if you remember after a crisis in the late 70s or the beginning of the 80s, which was deemed to be caused by the unions were then crushed, right? And there hasn't just been that level of, these people caused it, let's crush them. That's not what's happened this time, right? And I think we've got a point here about, you know, stronger unions is one way we can address inequality. Wasn't there a figure about that was tax havens, right? So let's talk a little bit about tax havens.
Do it.
So the UK, we can do a lot about tax havens, right? Because we are basically the tax haven, the big puppet master of tax havens, much as we pretend that we've got nothing to do with any of them. Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Bermuda, Jersey, Gibraltar. So we're connected to all of these, right? But we can't seem to stop talking about benefit fraud instead, right? Mm. So what was that figure on?
So you've got here, at home, for every £1 that's lost in benefit fraud, £4 is lost in tax evasion or avoidance. That's something that, according to The Guardian, there are over 5 times more people working on benefit fraud, presumably to combat benefit fraud, than they are to almost address the issue with the tax havens.
So this is something that we clearly need to deal with, right? You've got this, we're losing 4 times as much in tax evasion, and you've got the government employing over 5 times more people working on benefit fraud. This is political, and it's nothing more. So, tax, we're afraid of tax. We don't want to talk about tax, but how can tax make things better?
So you could have some progressive, what they call progressive anyway, progressive fiscal policies which will focus on taxation. So for example, corporate tax is one thing that is a common way to combat, or not to combat, but to reduce inequality, to cut a little bit off the top, to redistribute it to the bottom. But it's a bit more complex than that, right? Because it's not just a case of raising corporate tax as high as possible, it's about incentivizing these companies, these corporations, at least the big money-making businesses the big boys within the industry, to invest in local economy and to invest in the local economy, whatever that may be, whether it's in the country's economy or the actual community's economy. And you can do that through a series of progressive taxation.
Right, yeah, because you just lower corporation tax, right, and then they just automatically invest, right? Isn't that how it works?
It is. Well, that's what Ireland, Bulgaria, Luxembourg, this regulatory race to the bottom that's going on in the EU at the moment. That's what's believed. But it tends to only benefit corporations and completely disadvantage the average citizen, the normal citizens of a country.
I can't believe you're suggesting that this isn't actually working right now.
Well, like Joseph Stiglitz talks a lot about this, right? Like the evidence just isn't there for low corporation tax, and that drives investment, right? So, but we keep doing it. So one thing that you can do is instead of just assuming this is going to happen automatically, actually create a tax system which incentivizes and rewards corporations that invest, right? So if a corporation invests in the UK or invests in the US, then they get lower tax rates. If they don't invest and they keep their money offshore, then you're going to pay higher tax rates, right? And that creates a real incentive to invest, and the reason to do it other than just giving them a free ride with low corporation tax either way. Right, so we need to be smarter.
And it's worth drawing a parallel very quickly with the idea of interest rates. And so interest rates are raised or lowered depending on how much you want the country to spend. So if you raise tax interest rates, people are going to save more because they get more interest from banks, and they have to spend more, they have to pay more in interest if they want to make a loan, and vice versa with our now 0.25% interest rate. So that's the same idea. You're incentivizing people to spend more or spend less. And in this case, you're encouraging them. You're saying you're going to pay less tax if you invest in the economy. We're going to give you a tax break if you invest in your local area, as opposed to keeping it back, chucking it on the Cayman Islands or whatever it may be.
And all of these things, I think, are going to... Oh, I don't know. Are they going to do something for social mobility?
Possibly. Quite a lot, actually. So I think there's... If we look at the welfare state just as a very quick example, if we go back to the first conversation we had and the first video we had, there's almost, I think you touched on it at the beginning, if you work hard, you're going to earn more, you're going to work your way up the career ladder, if you like. The issue we have with social mobility is that these ladders just aren't always there, especially for those that almost don't start off in wealthy families or in high-income families. So if we can address some of the points that you guys have talked about just now, it's going to help people that work hard, it's going to help them to achieve more, it's going to build those social mobility bridges, it's going to bring those ladders back into society. I'm not saying that that's a direct consequence, but I think it generates, if we go back to your chart here, if you are reducing inequality, you are reducing social mobility, you're going to have almost less social problems, if you like.
Right, so reducing inequality basically gives you much more access to public services, to education, to better healthcare, to funding if you're unemployed or for whatever reason that you can't work, that you don't feel like you're going to need to rely on food banks, that you have the same opportunities, or at least comparable opportunities with everybody else in society, right? That's the whole idea behind what we're talking about, I think.
And I think the time has come to start talking about greater public investment again. And I think...
Fucking Marxists, I tell you what.
I'm a bloody Marxist, ain't I? Where'd this guy come? Who let him in? And I think May has talked about that, right? Even Osborne was talking about it a lot more before he, And you know, obviously Corbyn and McDonnell, they were also talking about this fund of infrastructure investment, right? And I think investing in any kind of public goods is going to be one way to increasing social mobility.
Mm-hmm. National Investment Bank, I think that's what Corbyn calls it, Corbyn McDonnell.
National Investment Bank.
Yeah.
In what way? Are you talking about you bringing more people into employment in the skilled labour workers? I guess that would be the way to put it. Is that what you're talking about, national investment?
Yeah, well, firstly there's a lot, infrastructure-wise, there's a lot that needs to be done in the UK. You can talk about broadband as one thing. You can talk about fixing the railways that don't get stuck in rain all the time, or modernising the roads, or fixing the roads, or whatever. Like, that's one aspect, and you could pump public money into that, which would create jobs. People have to work on that themselves, and that gets money going in the economy. Or broadband is the same way.
Education is an obvious example, right? If you invest in a high level of education, there's going to be less of a divide. You're not going to have as clearly pronounced 7% in private school, 70% of high court judges, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we invest in education, we're giving people a better shot, reducing their private-public gap. Health is another obvious example, right? So there's been these huge cuts to mental health and so forth, and that's primarily going to hit people who can't afford the loan.
Pleased you mentioned education here, because I think there's a lot, or certainly at the moment, we tend to prioritise, when we talk about education, when we talk about developing the education system, improvements and so on and so forth, we tend to prioritise this sort of like, I don't know, let's say hypothetical age 3 to 23, so nursery through to university. What doesn't seem to be given much consideration, or certainly isn't talked about, is adult education. And I think that we live in a time now whereby you don't actually go into one career and you don't stay there for 40 years of time and so on and so forth. If you had, or almost if you promoted adult education more, if you had more adult education available, if you had opportunities for people to enter into education, almost a second chance in life, as an adult, that I think would also improve social mobility quite significantly, because you have people, I mean, social well-being is actually almost directly linked to social mobility in some ways. If you feel trapped, if you feel you're in a sort of a cyclical life of despair,
Jesus, that sounds awful.
I know, it's
One
terrible.
of them.
But if you feel that way, you're not necessarily going to be inspired, and therefore you are almost helping the statistics of this low social mobility. Whereas if you have these opportunities, you have the opportunity to change your education, to almost start again, if you like, with a career at any stage in life, then those ladders will naturally become available to
Become reachable.
The
lower rungs. Okay, excellent.
Let's draw it together, shall we? So so we talked about the benefits of inequality in terms of the association, low inequality, greater social problems, less social problems rather. So how can we go about reducing inequality? So combating tax havens, having stronger corporate governance and antitrust laws, regulating the financial sector more strongly, and more progressive tax systems. So go and look into them more. There's a great article I think you've got written down here.
Bill Moyers, an economist blogger, and the title is Key Takeaways from Stiglitz. This is Joe Stiglitz' tax plan for growth and inequality.
So go and take a look. That's based on the US, but I'm sure there's a lot of things which are relevant to the UK. And write a letter to your MP, engage, talk about it on social media. And of course, thank you very much. Like, share, follow, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.